All right, well, welcome. We'd like to invite you to join us tonight for the third Places for People event at 5:30 at the Advanced Learning Library. This will be a chance for the community to engage the process of creating a walkable, vibrant city. Just a reminder, the fireworks go on sale tomorrow, June 27th, and may be shot off through July 5th, 10 a.m. until midnight. Please be aware that only fireworks sold within the city limits are allowed. For more information, please visit wichita.gov/fireworks. And now for a look at what's coming on today's City Council agenda. Today, the Mayor and City Council will look at designating a common consumption area in District 1, discuss a code amendment which would allow expanded hours of operation and sale for alcoholic beverages, and after the City Council meeting, there will be a workshop which will take place here in the City Council chambers. For the latest City of Wichita news, we encourage you to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Cox Channel 7. Good morning, Mayor Longwell and City Council.
Good morning, Megan, and that was a lovely introduction this morning. She's never heard that before, I'm sure. Thank you, Megan, lovely. Just a quick note this morning, we have obviously a few people absent. We have Councilmember Johnson, who is attending a National League of Cities meeting in Little Rock, Arkansas this week. We have Brian Fry, who has scheduled a trip down to Oklahoma this week, and we have Councilmember Meissner, who is leading a regional group of transportation people. Wichita is hosting a regional transportation meeting, and Councilmember Meissner is the chair of our Wichita Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, and so he is kicking that regional meeting off this morning, and then he will join us here hopefully before we finish. But we're pretty fortunate to have people that are in positions like that, especially when we are working hard to get some regional transportation issues solved, and to have our folks in charge of some of those regional opportunities, I think bodes well. So we will call the meeting to order, and we have an invitation this morning by the Reverend Vernon Perkins of Evangelical Methodist Church, and following that we will have a Pledge of Allegiance, and we invite you to join us for both. Reverend Perkins, good to have you.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you this morning to invoke your presence on this council meeting. Please guide our mayor and each member as they make a number of very important decisions in regard to the events and activities of our city. Your word tells us that the authorities over us are blessed by divine appointment. So guide each of them in the knowledge of your guidance, first of all, and may they have wisdom from above in their deliberations. And Father, in a special way, be with the first responders in our community as they also serve in their work, which is so necessary for our welfare. Father, all this we ask, in the name of our Lord, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Reverend Perkins. We appreciate your words this morning. And the first item is the approval of the minutes of June 19th, 2018. Any changes or corrections? Seeing none, I move that we approve those meeting minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote. And it passes unanimously, thank you. 4-0. So we can move on. We do have a public agenda. A quick proclamation. Christmas in July. So everyone needs a little Christmas in July. We have the Salvation Army hopefully with us this morning. Is Craig here? And then we have Wichita County Fair. So we have a little Christmas in July. We have the Salvation Army hopefully with us this morning. Is Craig here? And then we have Salvation Army hopefully with us this morning. Is come on down. We're going to share a Christmas in July campaign. I don't see any Christmas gifts with you. I know the manager's been bad. So a proclamation from the city of Wichita. Whereas the Salvation Army is the single largest provider of social services of its kind in the United States, arriving in Wichita in 1886 to feed the hungry, clothe the poor, and bring hope to the dispirited. And whereas the Wichita City Command and its area corps has part of the Kansas and western Missouri region helps more than 294,400 each year by providing millions of meals, tens of thousands of nights of shelter, a wide range of other critical services for the less fortunate, and for our neighbors who have nowhere else to turn for help. And whereas the seasons change, so does the efforts of the Salvation Army, providing heat relief with fan distribution, keeping first responders hydrated amidst disasters or fire, and providing our teachers with desperately needed school supplies for our children's classrooms. And whereas the young and old alike devote thousands of volunteer hours distributing food monthly from their food pantry to providing thousands of nights of shelter or the loving guidance when fear consumes those considering hopeless situations. And whereas community businesses and organizations allow the Salvation Army to use their sites later this year with red kettles to collect money for the less fortunate in our community, now therefore be it resolved that I, Jeff Longwell, Mayor of the City of Wichita, Kansas, do hereby proclaim July of 2018 as the Salvation Army's Christmas in July Campaign Awareness Month, and call upon the people in Wichita to acknowledge the importance of the work of the Salvation Army provides, and reminding our community that today's Army is more than toys by giving joyfully and compassionately with donations throughout the year. And Craig, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. And City Council. Today's Salvation Army also reflects the fact that change, as we all know, is a constant. With our programs, with our services, with our daily lives here in the Wichita and the Sedgwick County area. Today is my extreme pleasure that this worked out to introduce our new city commander at the city command office in downtown Wichita, though he will be overlooking all of our work in Sedgwick County. Coming from Minneapolis-St. Paul, a little difference of terrain, and we were just talking prior to coming over about all of the lakes in Kansas compared to all of the lakes in Minnesota. We're right up there. It's my pleasure to introduce our new city commander, Major James Curl.
Well, officially, I'm not the city commander until tomorrow, when my appointment really starts. But I've been in Wichita for a total of about 24 hours, and I'm really glad to be part of this presentation today. And I want to thank you and the city of Wichita for what you've done to support the Army in the past, and pledge to you as the new city commander that I'll do everything I can to keep up the good work of the Salvation Army and to benefit the people that we serve here. Thank you very much.
Madam Clerk, you want to call the next item, please?
James Roseborough, thanking the city for helping Wynn attend NUSA.
Good morning, Mayor Longwell, members of the council. I'm James Roseborough, president of Wichita Independent Neighborhoods. This is Dr. Carla Lee, vice president of the Wichita Independent Neighborhood, president of West Link Neighborhood Association, and La Familia, the chairman for that, the lead person. This is Ms. Sharon Stout. Hola. Mayor Longwell, on behalf and council, on behalf of the people, the men and women of the Wichita Independent Neighborhoods, we want to thank you for donating the $1,500 for us to attend the 43rd NUSA conference that was held in Birmingham, Alabama. May the 23rd through the 26th. And the theme there was Building Tomorrow Neighborhoods Today. And it was really interesting. We had 9 work tracks with 64 work sessions to attend. It's quite a few, and each one of us attended whatever we could. Birmingham is a city of approximately 213,000 people, and I learned some things I didn't know that. It's got hills in it. I did not know that. The attendees for the conference was myself, Miss Loretta Buckner, who's a NUSA board member and also a WIN member, Dr. Carla Lee, president of the Philadelphia Meeting, and Sharon Stout with WIN. The overall amount of people that was in attendance at the conference was 800. That represented 29 states and 2 countries, and it was worthwhile. They had 14 neighborhood pride tours that was really interesting. The people took great pride in showing their city off. And I think everyone that attended learned something from that. And the conference work tracks, as you can see, is up there now. And I'm gonna step aside here and let Dr. Lee and Ms. Stout talk to you
So James,
about.
here's what we really need you to do is be the spokesperson, because those 2 aren't signed up. And if we allow people to walk up, it changes our policy. And so they really needed to sign up to be on the council agenda. And I'm not saying that to be mean, I'm just following policy.
Okay, well, that's, we can understand that. I don't believe if you saw a track, but anyway, Wichita was represented well, as usually, at the NUSA conferences. And this year, we were finalists. When I say we, that's a familiar senior citizens were finalists out of 17 people for the Best Neighborhood Program Award. And I must say, I'll pass this around and you can take a look at that. And I don't know how to say this. Our ladies were brilliant, as you can see from the picture that's showing there now. And I think what got away with the judges there more than anything else was the amount of languages that you spoke with. And they put Wichita on the map again. And we've been on the map ever since we started attending this conference back in 1997. And almost every year, every other year, we win something to bring back home with us. Dr. Lee, Ms. Stout, and the rest of the people that worked on this program, we thank you for that. We thank you for that. WIN, thank you. And I know, and I'm going to see here WIN contributions to NUSA. We're an affiliate member. We got an active board member, as I said before. And we did take 4th place award in a Philadelphia Meeting newsletter, won that. And so this is, out of the last 5 years, I think this is our 3rd year that one of our newsletters from Wichita has been recognized, took some kind of award for doing the work in that. And I don't know if this might be just a little bit backwards, but I think 4th place should be the best neighborhood, La Familia in place of 5. Am I correct in saying that? And I don't know how to say this. We show diversity. The amount of diversity that the La Familia does and the senior citizen and the things, the reach out that they've done for people was tremendous. I can remember in the early years when we went to the NUSA conference starting back in the late 90s, and I hate to say this, some of our people are dead now, but we went to how to bring diversity to Wichita. And we worked hard at that, and today this program that they put on showed the fruit of that labor. And some of the workshop highlights was, we put here as the mayor of Powell, Birmingham, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi, and New Orleans, Louisiana. I understand that was a tremendous conference. I got there late, thank God, to getting a ride out of Wichita and through Atlanta and the storms that was happening.
James, it's not surprising that you've used up all of your 5 minutes either, but if you can wrap it up in about 20 seconds.
I got you done. And remember this, Building Tomorrow Neighborhoods Today was a theme. And you won't believe this, man, Longwell and James, I know you were here. People want to know when we're going to bring Wichita, the NUSA conference to Wichita. After your presentation, I know that was asked. Okay, so I'll take any questions that you may have. And look at that, you can see Loretta and Sharon having hot chicken. Okay.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you all, and we know that you all work hard for no pay to make Wichita a better place, and we appreciate your efforts, so thank you very much.
Okay, see next year, Palm Spring, California. We changed the dates back to May the 15th through the 18th.
Thank you. I'm glad we don't have to pay you by the word, James. Madam Clerk, next speaker.
Douglas Willis Jr., issues with WPD in Sedgwick County.
Is Douglas Willis Jr. with us this morning? Douglas Willis doesn't appear to be here, so we will move on to the next item. Madam Clerk.
Consent agenda items 1 through 19.
I think we do have one item that's housing. I don't know if we have Andrew Martin. Yeah, Andrew Martin, you want to come down? You were hiding in the back. John's getting kind of tiny and hard to hide behind. You ought to probably sit behind Alan King. I'm kidding, mostly. So we have consent agenda items 1 through 19, and that includes a housing item. Are there any changes, corrections, any items that need to be pulled for discussion or clarification? Seeing none, I would move that we approve consent agenda items 1 through 19.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? So we will record our votes, and Andrew will record her voice vote. So
Yay.
And the motion passes 5-0. Andrew, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Designation of common consumption area authorizing possession and consumption of alcoholic liquor, public hearing and resolution.
Mayor, Council, John D'Angelo, Arts and Cultural Services. What's before you today is the public hearing for a common consumption area designation by the ordinance or resolution to define boundaries and times for alcohol consumptions in areas not otherwise subject to the alcohol license. Level Up community events scheduled for July 21st of this year has applied for a common consumption area in the 215 South Market and East William Street from Main Street to Market. This is in the parking structure itself. It includes levels 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, and 9 that they intend to use for their event. Street closure request was approved by you in June 5th. Williams to Main Street Market from 8 a.m. to midnight. The code requires a public hearing today to be scheduled before the council. Notification of the hearing was mailed on June 14th to the owners within 200 feet of the property. Staff has reviewed the application and finds that the criteria has been met and recommendations of approval. Here's the location of the proposed event.
I'm not going outside. I can't.
Hold on one second.
This is Mr. Willis.
Mistreated right now.
Mr. Willis.
That takes me once a tingle for the time in my heart. Slam my head to the concrete. I just got disinfected in a fucking hospital. Don't put your fucking hands on me.
from the booth when he's back on? I think that's a thumbs up, okay. It's a smoky glass back there. So welcome back. We will resume our council meeting, and John, we'll have you continue on with your agenda item.
Again, what's before you is a common consumption area for a community event. I'll go back to this map that outlines the location showing the use of the garage as well as the street closures. Again, today's the public hearing for people to express their comments to you before you take action on approving it or not. I stand for questions.
Do we have any questions? Councilmember Claycomb?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. John, can you explain a little bit? I think this is the first common consumption area we've
Correct.
seen, right?
Correct.
So can you explain a little bit about why they are doing a common consumption area instead of like a community event? I think it would be helpful maybe to the public.
A temporary entertainment district would be the other option. Their desire is to have alcohol by multiple vendors, and under a temporary entertainment district, you can only have one caterer that services it. Here, they're trying to have multiple vendors on multiple floors, so this will allow that to occur. Again, they'll hold the liability for the license as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the duration of this designation is what? Do they annual renewals?
The actual common consumption is an annual license that they receive. Obviously, in this particular case, because it's a city-owned property and we're giving them permission for this single event, at this point, that's the only use that they would have of it.
But the permit's good for a year, right?
The license is good for a year, that's correct.
Okay. We'll go out to the audience. Anyone in the audience like to address the council on this agenda item? If you'll come to the podium and share your name. And
My name is Christophe Coutinho. My wife and I just got to your town about 8 months ago. As you saw how the gentleman was acting, that right there is why you want to cut down on the alcohol consumption. And if y'all want to do anything better, pull the alcohol and beverage consumption away from your immediate downtown area, outside of your freeway system, because that's part of what happens when you deal with alcohol consumption like this. I'm an ABC certified bartender caterer for 10 years down south in Houston, where I'm from. We've seen too much of this, and that hurts a lot of cities. And that really makes a bad impression on people when they come to a city or town to see that.
okay.
All right.
Thank you. Anything else?
Well, if y'all could, if you really want to help your city, shall we say, grow in a safe, possible way, the one thing you can do is crack down on your slumlords, make them clean up their properties the way it should be.
So this isn't an open forum. This is agenda specific. So if you want to talk about the permit for this alcohol consumption area, that's all we're talking about on this agenda item.
And where can I get a permit?
So you can sign up for a permit for that. If you just want to talk about anything on the, outside of the agenda, you can sign up with the clerk to come and speak, and you'll have 5 minutes before the meeting, what we call a public agenda.
Okay, and how frequently do they happen?
Every time that we have a meeting, you can sign up potentially, and you can speak once every 4 weeks.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Welcome to Wichita. Any other speakers? Seeing none, we'll bring the discussion back to the bench. And we have the chairman of the WAMPO that has joined us from his regional meeting. Councilmember Meissner, glad that you were able to kick off our regional transportation meeting, and obviously you were here early enough to hear about this agenda item, and if there's no other discussion, I would move that we take the staff recommended action.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Cast your vote. Motion passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, next item.
The Orpheum's American Graffiti Car Show community event with alcohol consumption.
Again, Mayor, John D'Angelo, Arts and Cultural Services. What's before you today is another community event. The Orpheum Theater at 200 block of North Broadway applied for a community event on June 30th. They've asked for a street closure, was approved on June 19th. First Street from Broadway to Topeka, area businesses and residents have been notified. The code requires a resolution authorizing the consumption of alcohol on public streets. This is a temporary entertainment district, unlike the first item, for First Street to be closed. Staff has reviewed the application for the community event and the consumption of alcoholic liquor allowed and finds the criteria has been met. This shows you the location of their booths and also what will be used during that event. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions at this point? Seeing none, we'll go out to the audience. Anyone like to address the council on this agenda item? Seeing none, all right.
James Roseborough, 4518 Greenbrier. And I'm looking at that, and that's a little bit misleading up there. When I saw that, I saw graffiti. And that's the word in the neighborhood is talking about graffiti. I thought we were going to talk about, you guys were going to talk about graffiti on buildings and so forth. I come here this morning and I think about Graffiti Car Show. That was an old TV program back in the 80s or sometime. And so I just make yourself a little bit clear on this stuff, because I come here and told my people to stay so we could find out where we do have problems with graffiti. And yesterday I had 3 reports of graffiti right down 21st Street, west side of town and over on Central and places. And so it's a bit misleading as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, James. Any other speakers? We'll bring discussion back to the bench. And I will hand this over to Councilmember Claycomb, and I know she's old enough to remember the American Graffiti movie.
I am, you are correct. So I would move that we adopt the resolution to allow alcohol consumption upon sidewalks and public streets within the parameters outlined in the community event application and during the Orpheum's American Graffiti Car Show event, June 30th, 2018.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Motion passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Ordinance amendment to section 4.16.120 of the Code of the City of Wichita pertaining to expanded hours of operation and sale of alcoholic liquor by licensed clubs and drinking establishments.
Good morning, Mayor and council members. Jennifer Magana, City Attorney. This proposed ordinance would amend the city ordinance expanding the hours of operation and sale of alcoholic liquor by licensed clubs and drinking establishments. Currently, city ordinance provides that the serving, mixing, or consumption of alcoholic liquor on the premises of clubs and drinking establishments is not allowed between the hours of 2 a.m. and 9 a.m., which is consistent with prior state law. Additionally, this current section prohibits clubs and drinking establishments that are not also hotels or restaurants from remaining open to the public between the hours of 2 a.m. and 9 a.m. The Kansas legislature this year adopted House Bill 2470, which did expand those hours of service from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. for the premises of clubs and drinking establishments. The provisions of this bill were signed into law and became effective on May 24th of this year. The amendment before you would make the city's ordinance consistent with the state law, would allow liquor to be served at clubs and drinking establishments at 6 a.m. and would also, under city ordinance, allow those clubs and establishments that are not hotels and restaurants to be open at 6 a.m. You have a couple options before you today. You can retain the current ordinance with the hours of operation as they were. However, the city has received inquiries on the difference between the city ordinance and the state law. There's been a little confusion on some operators, and so the city has prepared this ordinance to be consistent with the state law. If you are supportive of it, we recommend you declare an emergency and approve the ordinance on first reading. You are authorized to waive second reading for ordinances, and if you do so, this ordinance will be effective this weekend on June 30th. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll go out to the audience. Anyone like to address the council on this agenda item? Seeing none, we'll bring discussion back to the bench. Obviously, the staff recommendation is to mirror the state law. And is there any discussion on that? Councilmember Clendenin?
Well, I know we have one of our deputy chiefs here. I don't know if he's even prepared to speak on this necessarily, but I have, and somebody might know the answer to this, but when everything closes down at 2 o'clock, everybody pours into the streets, especially in Old Town. I've been there and I've seen it's just masses of people. Do you anticipate that this will slow down, at least trickle people out of Old Town and make it a little bit safer for everybody?
Well, no. Way to put him on the spot, Jay.
Sorry. Well, if people aren't forced to leave all at once.
Well, they still closes at 2. This doesn't change that.
I thought this allowed them to be open till 6.
No,
My mistake. Got it.
Okay.
The hours of operation are just expanded to begin opening at 6 in the morning,
Okay.
as opposed to 9 in the morning.
Maybe I should pay attention better. Thanks.
okay.
No. We don't want you
So
to
the crowd's getting in at 6.
Yeah. Well, all right.
So this still closes all operations at 2 a.m. like they currently are.
Gotcha.
That's correct.
All right. If there's no other discussion, I would move that we take the staff recommended action.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Motion passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Amendments to Section 11.38.150 and 11.38.155 of the Code of the City of Wichita regarding traffic ordinances.
Good morning, Mayor, Council, Mr. Manager. I'm here today to talk about DUI ordinance. In the spring, the governor signed House Bill 2439 and Senate Bill 374, which makes a number of changes to the state law regarding driving under the influence, and our ordinance needs to mirror that. The new state law increases the penalty for DUI when there's a minor present, and also cleans up some language issues and the wording when it comes to reporting DUIs to the state. The penalty for DUI with a minor will change. It'll be a 30-day mandatory imprisonment, and also there'll be an age change. This will apply to passengers under the age of 18 instead of the age of 14 as currently written. It'll also apply to the offender, must be 18 or older, for this enhanced penalty of 30 days imprisonment to apply. The new state statute also corrects wording to allow multiple alternatives for the fact finder or the prosecutor. The fact finder, it used to be you could only find someone guilty for alcohol or drugs, but now there's multiple alternatives. It'd be alcohol only, drugs only, and drugs and alcohol, so there'd be a third option. The state law does not allow municipal ordinances to be less restrictive, so our ordinance will be in compliance with state law. The changes to mandatory penalties at the state level require a change at the local level, and we recommend the city ordinance mirror the state statute. This ordinance revision will protect the city of Wichita prosecutions to ensure that we can use prior convictions in state court, and the WPD recommends that we declare an emergency and the council sign the ordinance into law without a second reading to comply with the changes in state law that go into effect July 1, 2018. I have any questions?
Any questions?
I have a question, Mayor.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, please. Troy, so this is this 30-day mandatory imprisonment is for, it's if you have a DUI driver and a minor in the car?
Yeah, it'll apply 18? If you have someone under the age of 18 in the car. when you're...
So that was the effect of what the state was trying to do, was saying if you have a minor in the car and a DUI, then
Yes.
30 days.
Actually, it raises the age. It says 14 currently, now it says 18. But yeah, if there's a minor in the
Right.
car, this enhanced penalty would apply.
Okay, thank you. And we would have had 13 cases last year?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll go out to the public. Anyone in the public like to address the council on this agenda item? Seeing none, we will bring the discussion back to the bench. Again, I think it's important in this case that we mirror what the state's trying to do and hopefully remedy some of these situations of people being certainly irresponsible. So I would move that we take the staff recommended action, which is to follow the state law.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Cast your vote. Motion passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Approval of travel for Mayor Jeff Longwell and Vice Mayor Brian Fry to attend the Kaufman Mayor's Conference of Entrepreneurship, Kansas City, Missouri, July 10th through 12th, 2018.
So before James makes that motion, I just want to make sure everyone understands that this conference is something that we've been attending for about 4 or 5 years, one in hopes of hosting that at some point in time in Wichita, and the only way we're allowed to get in line to host is if we attend, and 100% of the conference is funded by the Kaufman Foundation. So it's a good conference and hopefully one that we'll host here in Wichita, and it does not cost the city any money for the Vice Mayor and myself to attend.
Mayor, I would move that we would take the staff's recommended action here and approve the travel.
A second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Motion passes 5-0. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Councilmember appointments and comments.
Any board appointments, comments? None. So, do want to just simply share that the community had come off of a weekend of hosting another very successful Wichita Open golf tournament and had a pretty exciting finish with a playoff, and the governor came to town to hand the Wichita Open trophy to the winner, and so we appreciate again another great community event. Continues to help put Wichita on the map, and love the folks that attended some record crowds this year. And so we'll hopefully see that trend continue. We do have an executive session, so before we adjourn the council meeting, where it looks like we're going to need about 15 minutes, and we'll have to do that back in the boardroom.
Mayor, we also have a workshop. Did you want to maybe do the executive session afterwards? Allow us to do the workshop now?
So I would prefer to adjourn the meeting to go into workshop. Okay. And that makes it less confusing on the workshop. So let's do the executive session for 15 minutes and then come back and adjourn and then go into the workshop, and it makes it a little cleaner, I think. Unless people want to go ahead and...
Whatever you want to do.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and go into executive session for 15 minutes. And if we all go directly there, it can be 15 minutes. So I would move that the council recess into executive session for 15 minutes to receive information and recommendations from staff in the preliminary discussions of acquisition of real property pursuant to KSA 754319 for the preliminary discussions of the acquisitions of real property. And the executive session is required to protect the city's rights to confidentiality of its negotiating position and the public interest. And we will return to these chambers no earlier than 10 o'clock.
Second.
Motion and a second. Cast your vote. If we can, let's head right over there. Motion passes.
sit next to Blue Ball finally one day.
No, no. So we have returned from executive session, and I move that we close executive session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to close. Cast your vote. And it passes 4-0. I move that we adjourn today's council meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? Cast your vote. And so our council meeting is adjourned, and we will turn it over to City Manager Bob Layton to begin our workshop this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have 3 items today we want to cover with you. First, we want to bring you up to date on the work we've been doing on the 2019-2020 operating budget and also the 10-year capital improvement program. And Mark Manning is going to start that presentation, and I will complete it in a discussion about the decision packages that are under consideration. After that, we're going to have a presentation on our ozone advance program and some, I think, very interesting and unique work that has been done by our staff or is underway by our staff that could make us a trendsetter, so to speak, nationally in terms of how we look at ozone and it's the causes for ozone problems in our region. And then the last is update that you asked for last year when you approved the nuisance ordinance. You wanted to understand how it was being applied and what impact it was having on the community and specifically on police calls, and we'll have a presentation on that as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Manning to give the introduction on the CIP and operating budget.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Mark Manning with the Department of Finance. As the manager mentioned today, I wanted to give a overview of the operating budget process and also the 2018-27 Capital Improvement Program, or CIP as we refer to it. So with that, I'll jump right into the CIP. The CIP, as you know, is a 10-year plan of community improvements. And you can see on this pie chart that that 10-year plan is approximately $1.8 billion. And that's pretty consistent with what I would have shown you about a year ago. It was also approximately $1.8 billion over 10 years. This chart shows you where the revenues come from to finance that expenditure level. And the takeaways are that water and sewer, which is over in the lower right-hand quadrant of the pie chart, is approximately 1/3 of our CIP revenue. Another 1/3 is GEO at large revenue and special assessments. GEO at large is an important pie slice, and that's at the very top because that's the pie slice that is represented by property tax revenues. So GEO at large and special assessment is approximately another 1/3. And then finally, everything else combined is approximately 1/3 of the revenue stream into the CIP. So let's look at a really big picture of where those dollars go to. Again, the total is approximately $1.8 billion, and again, that's over a 10-year time period. Roughly 1/3 of it, consistent with the revenue side, approximately 1/3 goes to water and sewer utility projects. Approximately another 1/3 goes to street and bridge projects, and the other 1/3 goes to everything else, which is primarily public facilities and freeways and parks and the airport. So again, staff has developed a draft proposed CIP for your consideration, and it has been developed based on a number of parameters, most of which were discussed over the last 3 or 4 months in a variety of forums. Some of those parameters are the CIP is based on a mill levy rate of 7.5 mills for the debt service fund beginning in 2019. You'll recall that in the past several years, that mill levy rate has been 8.5 mills, so this would be a 1 mill reduction from the current mill levy rate. Projects are prioritized in this CIP based on an updated model, and we'll go over that in just a couple minutes. And another important consideration is the financial capacity guidelines of this CIP. And those guidelines specifically for GEO at large debt service or property tax funded debt service is that we don't want our debt service as a ratio of revenues to exceed 67%. In other words, of all our property tax revenue, we do not want to spend more than 67% of that revenue for debt service. Ideally, that target would probably be a little closer to 50%, but we definitely don't want to exceed 67%.
Hey, Mark, can
Yes,
I
sir.
ask a question just to clarify back on that slide in this sound? So the 7.5 mils in the debt service fund, we're mainly talking about the half of the previous pie chart, because water and sewer are not part of this debt service fund. The water and sewer.
That's right. The enterprise funds are not included in the debt service fund, and you're exactly right. It's the pie slice here entitled Geo at Large. That is the pie slice that is property tax funded.
Right. So I just want to make sure that everybody's, I mean, it looks like a big number, but between special assessments on specials and water utility and local, so thank you.
Finally, I should mention local sales tax. As you know, we get a share of the county-wide local sales tax and have since 1986. And that sales tax in this CIP would be shifted maybe to a little bit more emphasis on arterial projects. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. So I want to give you a little historical perspective on the city mill levy rates. This chart shows a lot of bars that are pretty much exactly the same height, which is to say that our mill levy rate overall has not materially changed over this time period. But what you will see is that the light green bars on the top, which are the portion of the mill levy for the debt service fund, were at approximately 10 mils until about 2008, and then it was reduced over time to about 7.5 mils, and then it was increased back to 8.5 mils, and now at the bar all the way on to the right, you'll see that we would reduce it back to 7.5 mils based on the draft CIP that you have in front of you today. And again, that's also reflective of our efforts over the last several years to coordinate the CIP and the operating budget together a little bit more. So we talked about prioritization. This is the updated model which was used to prioritize projects that were included in the CIP, and in some cases the timing of those projects within the CIP. So we developed a model, and it's based on the community investments plan. It's based on consistency with other planning processes, specifically including whether it was in previous CIPs or in alignment with other departmental plans. Financial considerations is an important prioritization criteria when we look at the CIPs, specifically projects that leverage other funds. And finally, there's a variety of other considerations that lead to prioritization. Is it in alignment with decision support tools, or what's the level of community benefit and things of that nature? So that model played an important role in how projects were prioritized. So I talked about financial capacity. So we use this chart, and you're very familiar with this. The blue line is the 67% benchmark that we would like not to exceed. You can see that the takeaway on this slide is very consistent with what we would have shown you last year and the year before that and the year before that, which is that we would expect debt levels to increase in the short term, but moderate back to the target in the long term. And that's pretty much what this chart shows you. So we expect them to remain below the benchmark level, but we do expect them to increase somewhat in the short term. So I talked about use of local sales tax funds, or LST funds as we refer to them. Again, based on city ordinance, they can be used for freeways, bridges, and arterials. And we've completed a lot of freeway projects using local sales tax. That's been the primary funding source for all the Kellogg improvements since 1992. But we also have used them for bridge projects and arterials over the years. This CIP, again, when there's capacity available in the local sales tax fund, which we would expect sometime around 2023, we'll use those local sales tax dollars to fund arterial projects. Again, East Kellogg is currently underway. We'll have some financing on the tail end of that project, and so most of our capacity in local sales tax fund will probably begin sometime around 2023. I want to talk about debt levels briefly, and I don't know that I've shown slides like this in the past, but we've talked about this a lot. This shows our GEO at large debt levels. And you can see it's been fairly consistent in the past, and actually has declined over the last several years as we've amortized off our debt. We do expect our debt levels to increase. Again, we've consistently provided that message for several years now, and then we would expect them to moderate back to approximately $60 million by the end of the planning period, which is 2027. Relatively similar story on local sales tax. Again, we will finance the remaining East Kellogg projects over the next several years, which will cause our debt level to increase a little bit, and then we would expect it to moderate over the remaining period of the CIP. I should point out there's a lot of things that will impact those debt levels, the timing of when improvements are financed and a variety of other things. And I'd also remind you that every quarter in the quarterly report, we typically provide an update on the changes in the city's debt level. So next I want to go through some of the high points of what's included in the draft CIP. And again, the draft CIP is aligned with the operating budget for the most part. There's a number of public safety improvement dollars. CIP has 4 new police stations budgeted for $28 million. It has 5 fire stations, has a fairly sizable amount of money for fire trucks and equipment, and finally another $20 million or so for other public safety equipment, including police radios and things of that nature. Street maintenance continues to be very important. The CIP has a total of $78 million over the 10-year time period for street maintenance. And reminder, we supplement that with funding within the operating budget. Presumably that'll be approximately $36 million over the next 9 years. That, my math is right, that's $114 million over the 10-year time period. East Kellogg completion, I mentioned that's approximately $100 million included in this draft CIP. The West Street corridor remains in CIP. That's about $18 million. That would improve West Street from Kellogg, I believe, down to 47th Street South. There's an amount of money for downtown consistent with prior CIPs. That would be focused on catalyst sites. That's about $30 million. There's some park improvements. The Aquatics Master Plan continues to be funded at the level that was approved in the last CIP, which is $22 million. West Bank improvements, a lot of that is proposed to be funded with STAR bonds and TIF funds, but there is some GO at large money within that $80 million amount for the West Bank improvements. And we also support our cultural institutions with about $8 million of CIP improvements. So next steps for the CIP. Again, we have a draft copy of a CIP that will be presented to the district advisory boards at the July meetings. We also present to the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, so we'll hit the Advanced Plan Subcommittee on July 12th, and then we'll go to the actual Planning Commission on July 26th. Those meetings are very important because by state statute, the Planning Commission is required to find that our CIP is in conformance with the Community Investments Plan. We would expect that the city manager will present the proposed CIP to the City Council on July 17th in conjunction with the operating budget. And finally, City Council adoption of the CIP would be scheduled for August 14th, again, in conjunction with the operating budget. And with that, that's the end of my formal presentation on the draft CIP. I'd be happy to attempt to answer any questions.
Yeah,
go ahead, Peter.
Mark, just as an example, slide 11. In the past, my memory says that, like we had, in a previous, maybe 3 years ago, we had planned to execute on 1 or 2 police stations.
Yes, sir. And
for the public, we delayed those, and we have not executed on that. So there is some flexibility about, there's no hard line in the sand that says you have to do that year,
yes,
depending
sir.
on how.
That's a very good point. The CIP is a very flexible plan, and there's a lot of flexibility built into it. And I would emphasize it is a plan. But you are correct, sir.
Right. And that'd be the same, I guess, with the fire stations and truck purchase, equipment purchase, things like that.
If I can add, the police stations took on a little more importance when we used the City Council's new decision-making matrix, because it ties back to previous CIPs, it ties back to the police staffing plan, and so and public safety is a high priority. So it's that's a good example of an area that probably benefited from your new matrix.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mark? Seeing none, we appreciate your presentation.
I'm not finished yet.
All right. I'm excited.
Thanks, Mark.
I'm trying to contain myself.
Okay, well, with that, we'll jump right into the operating budget, if that's okay. And again, if you'll tolerate me for about 15 more slides, I'll continue. Wanted to give you an update on the operating budget, and we have talked a lot about the operating budget over the last 3 or 4 months. So a lot of this will be a rehash, but I thought it was important as a reminder. You'll recall that the adopted budget last year that was adopted did forecast deficits into the future. So that's nothing particularly new. Just a reminder, some of the challenges we have, our revenue structure has some components that are out of date. We've had some challenges in court fine collections. State sales tax collections have been challenged due to a number of reasons, but primarily due to challenges with remote sales. Our expenditure growth has actually been pretty moderate for quite some time, but the largest share of our expenditure growth, particularly in the general fund, is public safety, which is a little over 56%. And unfortunately, that largest share also tends to have the highest organic growth rate. So those are some of the issues that cause us challenges. So what have some of our strategies been to try to reach a balanced budget and to provide options to the City Council? Staff identified untouchable and touchable activities. And the concept there was to identify the untouchable activities that were the highest priority for city dollars. And that also identified the touchable activities, which are the areas that we would focus on for developing decision packages and options for perhaps expenditure adjustments. And you'll see some of those here in a little bit. Again, the concept is focusing our dollars in the highest priority or the untouchable areas. And then finally, we've also been looking a lot at cost recovery and based on a cost continuum model to ensure that we are recovering costs as appropriate. So just an update on some of the issues I talked about previously. Again, this is a little bit of a reminder, but court fines have improved a little bit from where we initially thought they would be, and we do expect those hopefully to recover as the police department fully implements their service adjustments that they have been planned. Sales tax, I'm happy to tell you, is improving slightly. I don't think we're still out of the woods, but sales tax has improved, particularly over the last couple months, slightly better than what we had expected. But takeaway is we still have challenges there, and we're still not performing at levels that we historically would have expected. Interest earnings, we are benefiting from actions of the Federal Open Market Committee or the Fed in raising short-term rates, and that is very advantageous for the city of Wichita because we have a lot of money that we invest in a relatively short-term investment. So that's a very good positive for us.
So
Yes, sir.
stop you there for just a second so everyone fully understands. Sales tax is performing a little better than expected. That could change dramatically because of the Supreme Court ruling. And so I don't know that it will impact next year's budget, but it potentially can start altering, obviously, future projections depending on how we start collecting more sales tax.
Yes, sir, that's a great point. I think there's a lot of unknowns, but definitely I think the Supreme Court decision this past week is definitely a positive.
As a follow-up to that, I think each state then has to approve. So we might.
Right, so it'll take some time.
We might want to put it on.
That's correct. And so we know that the 2019 legislature will deal with that issue. I know there's a lot of discussion on both sides of that politically, and so we're not necessarily counting on those revenues, but we will show in the projected 2020 budget those sales tax revenues, and then we'll have decision packages that the council, you wouldn't have to adopt, but it would give our indication of where we would go to fill the gap if the sales tax is not approved. So that as you talk to legislators, you can say with some certainty, these are the budget issues that we'd be facing if they don't approve the sales tax collection.
So let's talk about another area that is performing a little bit better than what we'd expected, and that's assessed valuation. Assessed valuation, of course, drives our property tax revenues. And with the flat mill levy, our growth comes from assessed valuation, which is, I'm happy to report, was slightly higher than what we had expected. We develop a staff projection, and we get the official estimate from Sedgwick County on June 15th, and that estimate, again, was slightly better than what we'd expected.
I don't think that surprises any of us.
So that will generate approximately an extra $100,000 that we didn't anticipate previously. And our total growth, if you're interested, is estimated about 3.5%, which actually is pretty strong particularly compared to what we've experienced over the last several years. So that was a good sign. And even maybe of more interest to you, the component that was derived from new construction, which is reflective of activity in the community, was up about 2.1%, which is also very good compared to what we've experienced historically. So that was good news. Finally, I want to mention health insurance. We talked about that several months ago, and just a reminder that some of our strategies to reduce and contain health insurance growth were successful last year, which did in fact reduce the health insurance base going forward, and that has been helpful as we structure the budget. So a reminder, this is what I would have shown you last month, and this is what we would have expected for our financial situation in the general fund, which is deficits beginning in 2019. I've updated that based on all the stuff we've talked about. Same theme, although the numbers are a little bit smaller, which is a good thing. Now, you'll probably also notice that both the revenue and expenditure numbers are both larger. That's reflective of shifting a mill into the general fund, and it's also reflective of including additional expenditures for the police department in our model. So the model that you reflected included those additional police expenditures. We've worked very closely with the police department and with the police chief in developing a financing model for the staffing study, phase 1. That study would include 21 new commission positions with an anticipated hiring date sometime in August. That plan also funds 11 civilians. 4 of those directly offset police officer positions, which would allow those to return to the field. And another 6 of those civilians would work in field functions, which again would relieve police officers from some of the duties they perform now, which would increase proactive policing time. So it's all designed to increase proactive policing time. And again, we've worked with the police chief on this plan. It includes a variety of one-time equipment purchases in 2018 for new cars and radios and things of that nature. And that would be funded with, we wanted to match that with a one-time revenue stream. So there's some asset sale proceeds that we would match that with. I've talked about street maintenance, so this slide may be a little redundant, but the plan that I showed you previously, the amounts continue to include the $4 million that we have in the operating budget for street maintenance. Just a reminder, we'll spend about $8 million this year, not including the Hyatt money. That figure is slated to rise to about $10 million next year and $11 million in 2020. And the next bump would be in 2024, I believe, when it would go to $13 million based on the current planning documents. So that's where we're at on the operating budget. And so the question then becomes, what do we do to reach a balanced budget? So again, based on the model that we've developed over the last several years, staff prepared a number of decision packages to provide options on ways that we potentially could reach a balanced budget. These packages focus on the touchable activities for the most part, and not the untouchable activities, again, under the theory that the untouchable activities are our highest priority activities. Now, our social media town hall was last Thursday, and several of you attended, which we appreciate. Hopefully you enjoyed yourself there. It was on June 21st, and 4 topics at that social media town hall. We based 6 of them on decision packages. First, the channels that we used were Facebook, Twitter, and Nextdoor. Nextdoor has been very successful for us. We initiated it last year and got a lot of reactions, so we used it again this year. We reached over 130,000 people. Now, in the old days, a reach is what Facebook would have called a view. Now it's a reach. So 130,000 basically page views of posts that we provided. We will prepare a report that summarizes the comments in a little bit more detail shortly, but I wanted to provide you some preliminary statistics. Again, we had about 134,000 reaches. We had close to 1,000 comments. That's very consistent with what we've had in the past. And then reactions, think of what used to be called a like on Facebook. That's what a reaction is. We got about 800 reactions, which again is pretty consistent with what we've gotten in the past. You can see that the participation varied based on several of the decision packages, but again, we were happy to get the feedback that we got, and some of the future slides, when we talk about specific decision packages, will give you a very high-level summary of the gist of the feedback that we received.
Thank you, Mark. As Mark indicated, the decision packages were built from the touchable items that you identified and some of the comments that you provided during the retreats. So we'll first jump into the fire medical response, and this whole idea was finding a better way to service those low acuity calls and the use of civilian EMTs and preserving then our sworn staff for the more important duties in terms of serious medical calls and fire calls. We received good feedback from the public. They were open to this different approach. They wanted us to make sure that we looked at what other communities were doing, and then there were a number of questions that were asked just for clarification purposes. Second item had to do with school resource officers and whether we should continue to provide that service in cooperation with 259 for SROs in the high schools. We heard from the community. Generally, we heard support for continuation of SROs. We had some folks who wanted to make sure that we had them in mentoring roles, in educational roles, but there was also a lot of discussion about safety in our schools. And so as a result of that, and also some discussions I've had with the chief and with the superintendent, I think what we'll be doing is not proposing for your consideration the elimination of that program, but instead, at a later time this year, rolling out a different model, one that I think follows some of the desires of the superintendent to do more restorative justice initiatives inside the school and to better utilize the people that are serving as community outreach officers for us, so to speak, as SROs. And so we'll bring that charter forward later. Yes?
Just a quick question, and I should know this. How do we utilize SROs in the summer?
They're back on the street and serve as community police officers, is my understanding.
Good.
Animal shelter. The question was, is there a different model for the operation of the shelter? You indicated that the actual enforcement was an untouchable, but you were open to ideas on how better to operate the shelter. And there was the feedback we had from the community was very positive about looking at alternatives, but there was a heavy emphasis on making sure that we have a high level of live releases, and so that should be an area of emphasis as we look at a new model. So we will be bringing something forward to you, one that will involve other parties in the operation of the facility, but with a continued subsidy, recognizing that we won't be able to turn that operation over and expect someone to be able to bear that full cost. Question is, with the new advanced learning library, what should we be doing with our branch system? Does it warrant a review of the role of the branches? And what we heard from the public is that they're very happy with the branches that they utilize. They do believe they'll use the advanced learning library more, but they have support for the branches. We know we have a financial issue that has to be addressed in terms of the deficits facing us for 19 and 20. So I think we're going to drill down deeper regarding the role of some of these branches and how they're utilized by the community to see if there's a way that we can better balance the needs for the advanced learning library going forward and the needs of the community for access to library services. In terms of code enforcement, this is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart because this year we've had, I've had some interesting discussions with some of you and also at one of our retreats regarding the role of code enforcement. And is there a way for us to be a little more proactive in what we do, but also is there a way to try to get better results from voluntary compliance? And we've been doing a pilot project in District 3 and have discovered some interesting things. If we go in partnership with the neighborhood association and then we put a little more resources into a neighborhood, we think we can make a difference. And what we really found is that by simply doing door flyers and other notices without going into the court system, we can get a high compliance rate from residents. So I'd like the council to have more discussions going forward regarding a little change in our model. This may not mean a change in our resources at all, but maybe a better way of approaching some of the issues that our neighborhoods are facing. I'd like to see the neighborhoods take more ownership of some of the property maintenance problems that they have. Right now, I hate to say it this way, but we make it too easy for people to be able to call in a complaint about their neighbor without ever trying to deal with that issue with the neighbor or with others in their neighborhood. And maybe there's a way that using a partnership with neighborhood associations, possibly bringing to bear neighborhood mediation to deal with some of these issues prior to us ever generating a case in court, maybe we can have more success. And I think the District 3 pilot gives us the reasons for hope in that regard. terms of street sweeping, if you remember, what we said is that one pass through our residential areas was untouchable. But then we have 2 other passes that we make during the year, and the council listed that as touchable. And so we went out to the public as part of the social media town hall, and we found that the community maybe disagreed with that definition a little bit, and that they believe that street sweeping, all 3 cycles, are untouchable, and that that is a true core service for us. So being mindful of that, that's probably not something that I'll include for your consideration in the recommended budget for 2019, but I will probably put it on the list for 2020 if we're not successful in getting sales tax receipts from internet sales. In street maintenance, the question was, since this is one of our most important core services, should we look at restoring some of the staffing that we lost during the recession? And as you would imagine, there was, we didn't shop that one out, so that's one that I'll be bringing forward about whether or not it's possible to balance the budget, but also fill some of those vacant positions. There were the rest of these decision packages were not tested during the forum, but I wanted to bring them to your attention, and that is whether or not, in terms of our operation of City Arts, whether we should be looking at maybe a possible partnership in the operation. Keep responsibility for programming. Programming is successful. We're doing a good job there and filling a community need. But in terms of the rest of the time, is there a different way to staff that facility than what we currently do? And could we do that in partnership with a group such as the Arts Council? I mean. And then the question is, should we continue in the operation of Botanica, the Indian Museum, and Cowtown, as we do today, where we provide staff, or should we look at those boards taking over responsibility over time, or some other model, and then we still will provide a subsidy for the operation? I don't think we can withdraw our support for those organizations, but is there a better way where, in order to operate? That's a model that's similar to what's being utilized at the Art Museum today. And then the next item has to do with economic development. As you know, we fund multiple agencies in the area of economic development. Personally, I believe that that effort ought to be coordinated by the partnership, where we have substantial input from a professional staff and from the business community. There's over 100 of our businesses that are members of the partnership, and we're in the process of updating the BREG plan and looking at clusters, but we also have to talk, I think, in a greater, more comprehensive way about what are we going to do with international trade, what are we going to do in the area of small business, which I think is probably one of the ways for us to grow out of our current economic challenges. So is there a way that our dollars can be better utilized in a coordinated effort through the partnership? So that's one that I will be bringing forward.
So give us an example of the economic development fees. You're saying increase them.
Yes. When we had a retreat with you on economic development, we had a lot of application fees we were going to increase, for instance, for TIF and CID.
And that money would go into that.
Go into that, that's correct. So this is just a real quick summary of the items and the kind of savings that you could expect depending on what options you went forward with. What I intend to do is bring you a balanced budget, try to get you at least my initial thoughts in advance of the official release of the document, but also we have enough decision packages that if you choose not to go in the direction of what's recommended, you will have alternatives, and you'll be able to then, based on the feedback you gave us during the retreats, I think you have some other acceptable alternatives as well. I'm pretty confident we'll get there in 2019, be able to challenge maybe some of the ways we've been doing things, more importantly, whether we should continue to do programs that are considered non-core or touchable, so to speak, and to better refine our business model. Here's the schedule. It pretty much lines up with the schedule you saw for the CIP as well. That, Mayor, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions?
That's it for us.
I do have one
Yes.
thing I would encourage you to do. So obviously our budget has grown fairly significantly over the next couple of years. The projection for our budget to grow is pretty significant, almost $20 million.
In terms of expenditures, that you're saying. Yeah.
Right. So what I would encourage you to do is come up with a I think the pie chart's fabulous for the CIP that shows where the revenue and where the money's spent. Let's do the same pie chart to show which departments are receiving the majority of the increase in budget.
Okay.
Because I think it will let the community understand more easily where our priorities lie.
More than happy to do that. We have one that has grouped it in little larger categories. Public safety and streets, for instance, are 70% or more of our budget.
So I get that. Let's divide them up a little bit.
We'll be more than happy to do that.
All right.
Okay. Anything else? All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Alan King, Director of Public Works and Utilities. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing on our ozone program. And what I wanted to start off with was going over what this slide, you've seen it already. The ozone standard in parts per billion, this is surface ozone, the ozone down by the ground. The ozone way up in the top of the atmosphere is good ozone. The ozone that's down on the ground is bad. It has health effects. And it has been 75 parts per billion. And the way that that's calculated is you look at the 4th worst day of the year, and then you average those 4 worst days over 3 years. And if they exceed the limit, then you're out of attainment. And that standard was changed from 75 parts per billion to 70 parts per billion back in 2015. So we got a little bit bigger challenge ahead of us. You can look at the bars here and you can see a fairly significant drop in those last 3 average year periods. So much of that has to do with the weather, the amount of moisture, the temperatures, and that sort of thing, the thing that causes ozone to form. What I can tell you is that if we do find ourselves at some time in the future out of attainment, there are health and economic consequences. Conservatively, it's been estimated that the city would be looking at, the people in the city would be looking at somewhere around $10 million per year as far as financial consequences. It could even be bigger, and particularly if you're going to look at it from the standpoint of future development and the attractiveness of the city is to draw new business if we are designated out of attainment.
And that $10 million a year, most of that being spent on additives to the gasoline?
Yes, sir, that's right. So what the city did was they looked at a voluntary organization called Ozone Advance and joined it back in 2012. It's an effort to try to comply with the air quality standards and to encourage practices that reduce ozone forming emissions so that we can make some kind of an effect on ozone. Like I say, we entered into the program in 2012. We're looking to expand the influence of that partnership in the metropolitan service area by going through our Air Quality Improvement Task Force, which is an existing organization. And with the idea being that we want to try to reduce ozone so that it has better effects as far as health and economic impacts. The program is also seen as a way to get credit for our efforts, so that if we find ourselves out of attainment, that we could have perhaps a more favorable response by EPA and the state, and particularly in the state improvement plan. The involvement in the ozone program, I have to emphasize, is not just symbolic. We're trying to make real, smart, measurable improvements and to document them to try to really reduce ozone and to also position ourselves well in the future if we should find ourselves out of attainment. We presented a plan to council last year saying these are the steps that we were going to do. We had it mapped out into the future. As you can see, the first steps there, emission inventory. When we did the emission inventory, we found some surprising results. And we wanted to adapt to those results and change the program. And that's what we're here presenting to you, is to let you know that the program that we had in mind, the grayed out boxes there, were based on what we knew at the time were good positive steps. They were consistent with other participants in the Ozone Advance program. But like I say, what we found through the emissions inventory, in other words, what is really being produced here and what is the effect on ozone, made us look at a different sort of an approach, and that's what we want to bring here and talk to you folks today. In that inventory, if you look at the emissions that are generated here in the Wichita area, as you can see, the 8.9% point source, those are those industries that have air permit already, and that we check them to make sure that they are complying with their permit. That's what we have been doing up until recently, continue to do it now. But as you can see, that you're really addressing a very relatively small part of the emissions that are generated in this area. What we came to realize was some of the emissions are outside of our control, outside of not even man-made, biogenics, just by virtue of there being growing plants. You've got some of these emissions that contribute to ozone. The other important thing for us to look at was non-point. Those sources that are people painting, small businesses that don't have air permits, looking at ways to influence how people behave that have those kinds of operations, aren't controlled by a permit, but may be influenced by campaigns, public information campaigns. And then the big one was on-road and non-road use of fuel-burning engines, particularly traffic, cars and trucks. So based on this, what we realize is that, you know, rather than making a kind of a general approach, maybe we ought to make it more targeted, looking at those areas that we have a better chance of having some sort of an influence. So what we decided to do was to start with an air air quality model. Now, this takes the information that is collected on the emissions that are around and the ozone levels, and tries to model to see what's going on. Why are we? What's contributing to these levels of ozone? Normally, a model to do something like this would be in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $1 million. But staff contacted a company that was doing a air model, a very sophisticated air modeling for a petroleum company, and what we did was we worked out a deal for about $45,000, which council had already approved, to be able to coattail onto their model just by plugging our data into it, and that's what we did. So we had a very cost-effective air model so that we could really understand what was going on. The idea being that we wanted to understand the sensitivity of whatever efforts we made on actual ozone reductions. We also wanted to look at creating a new paradigm to EPA to consider. As you recall, we did something like that with a stormwater quality and had them look at a different kind of a way of enforcing water quality, and we worked directly with EPA and with the state's help to do that. We'd like to do something like that with the EPA, the Air Quality Division, to see if they would be interested in some sort of a relationship between what it is that our behavior and the ozone that we see, because what you'll find here a little later on in the presentation is some of this ozone, maybe a lot of this ozone comes from outside of our area. It has nothing to do with what we would be doing as far as reduction. If we reduced our emissions down to zero, we could still find ourselves in non-attainment. So what we'd like to do is open up a conversation with the EPA about taking that into consideration when they look at our attainment. And then finally, if we're going to impact behavior, which a lot of the sorts of improvements we're talking about, we need to have an effective public outreach campaign and strategy. So we're engaging in that. So what I'd like to do is now to dive into the specifics of the more details on the modeling efforts, the latest efforts in working with EPA on attainment paradigm shift with EPA. And then also our public awareness campaign. And so, Mr. Mayor, with your permission, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Bailey Cunningham, our environmental quality specialist.
An expert ozone person.
Yes, sir. Much more expert than me.
We would rather hear from Bailey.
Okay.
So, based on the emissions inventory findings,
it was decided to change the shift to the focus of the Ozone Advanced Program into the 3 categories that Alan described. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about the air quality modeling effort and the outcomes of the study. So, as he described, we contacted a consultant in the emissions inventory study phase to ask questions about methodology and just kind of get some ideas and gauge things since the emissions inventory process was relatively new to city staff. And through those conversations, we discovered that a land management study had been going on in the same region. So a lot of the pre-processing data required for air quality modeling had already been completed. That stage of air quality modeling is the most cost-intensive piece of air quality modeling, and with that having already been completed, it was a really unique opportunity for us to do some air quality modeling. So we initiated that process, and the air quality modeling was completed in April. This is one of the initial findings of that air quality modeling, and this is the episode max contribution to the 8-hour average. So when Alan was speaking to you about that, the 4th highest day and the formula, ozone season starts March 1st and ends October 31st. And during that season, the 4th highest day is used toward our attainment value. The 4th highest day is an 8-hour average of the highest ozone level during the 24-hour period. So we're looking at the max contribution to the highest 8-hour average at the Wichita Health Department monitor in 2013 in this bar chart. And as you can see, the greatest contribution during that season was from the North America background, and that was almost 42 parts per billion. So when you look at that 70 parts per billion standard, 42 parts per billion were contributed on one given day of that ozone season. They were contributed by the North American background. If you look at some of our other nearby regions, East Texas has at times a greater contribution to our ozone level at the health department monitor than the Wichita MSA does. And you can see that Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Missouri, a lot of surrounding areas have large impacts on our ozone levels here. The max contribution that the Wichita MSA had on any given day during that specific ozone season in 2013 was 18.7 parts per billion. So now I'm going to take a look at a breakdown of that max contribution.
So Bailey, before you move on.
Yes, sure.
So how can we distinguish who's impacting, say, between East Texas and Tulsa? How do we factor that?
So the model uses back trajectories. They look at the ozone that was in the area that day, and then they look at wind components. They look at the ozone that was in other regions and how that could have traveled to the city, and that's how they come up with the data in the chart.
Thank you.
So when looking at the chart on the left side of the screen, this is the episode max contribution from the Wichita MSA region, and it's broken down by those source categories. So the pie chart that Alan showed you earlier with the point source, non-point source, etc., this is looking at those same numbers. So we already identified that the max contribution that Wichita had on any given day was 18.7. Now we want to determine what is contributing to that max contribution. And we found that the highest contribution of on-road mobile sources to our ozone value at the Wichita Health Department monitor in 2013 was 8.8 parts per billion. Non-road mobile was 4.7. EGUs, or our energy generating facilities, around the MSA was 2.1, non-EGU, these are non-point sources, are 2.4, and then other is 2.6, and that's going to be those biogenics and the agricultural burning that we experience every year. So what this chart is showing us is that, again, our greatest contributor is on-road mobile sources. These are our everyday behaviors, whether we have congestion on our freeways, if people are choosing not to trip chain, or they're not packing their lunch, they're going out every day. These are the behaviors that the public exhibits, contributes to those, rather than business operations.
So going back to an earlier slide that Alan showed that we've made improvements. He mentioned much of it was weather related. How many improvements in these sources have we made over the last same period of time?
Well, fuel economy plays a large role in that reduction as well, and that would factor into the on-road mobile sources category. So seeing cars go from, 17, 20, 32 miles per gallon over this time period has definitely helped us lower the design value over time, and that fits into this category.
So that we can hopefully better address the issues in the future, it'd be nice to see a similar year-by-year data on that chart as compared to just the overall chart showing a drop in our ozone levels.
Okay. So similarly, looking at the chart on the right, this is looking at the two components that form, well, there's several components that form ozone, but two emissions that contribute to the formation of ozone, which is NOx and VOCs. This is looking at what portion of our max contribution is caused by NOx versus VOC sources. And what we found is that NOx surface sources have a larger contribution to the formation of ozone, almost 4 times larger than VOC surface emissions. So what this tells us essentially is that internal combustion is a greater contributor to our ozone formation in the Wichita region. So just a result overview from our air quality modeling. In 2013, Wichita was influenced by ozone transported from many different regions, some more so than our own region. The ozone contribution of Wichita MSA emissions varied, but reached a max value of almost 19 parts per billion. On-road and non-road emissions were the largest contributors, and modeling showed that NOx emissions controls are more likely to be more effective in reducing overall ozone formed in the region. The bulk of the emissions are NOx surface emissions due to, like I said, internal combustion, such as transportation, lawnmowers, hand tools, things like that. And transported ozone can certainly bring Wichita close to an exceedance of the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, especially when such a large portion of our day-to-day overall parts per billion or design value is being contributed to most by transport ozone. And then local emissions controls can reduce the Wichita contribution on highest ozone days, meaning that if our max contribution in an ozone season is 19 parts per billion, and we could lower that by just 20%, it would make a large difference on our overall ozone design value. So we had 2 goals in the air quality modeling process. We wanted to obtain all of that very relevant, very important information, and then we also wanted to design a tool that could estimate the effects of emission reductions on ozone at Wichita monitors. And so we developed a decision support tool to determine what air quality control strategies would be most effective. The way that this tool works is that the modeled the base emissions, the emissions that were found during this study, are located in those first 30 second and third columns. And then you can, in the blue, enter the reduced or controlled emissions, and then come up, the tool itself will calculate how ozone changes on the highest 15 days at each of those monitors in that given season. So here's an example application of the tool. If we were to enter reductions and zeroed out all of the reductions in the Wichita MSA, if we were to reduce every emission, every NOx and VOC emission in the MSA, this is what the tool would generate. The uncontrolled scenario is the original 8-hour average of ozone in parts per billion on the highest 15 days. And then the controlled scenario right beside it is if we were to have reduced all the emissions in the Wichita MSA. And you can see that on average, the reduction that we could see is around 3.3 parts per billion. And it's really important as we consider different strategies moving forward to input the predicted or projected reductions into a tool like this to see how effective those strategies might be in reducing ozone in the MSA.
So putting in and running, the obviously models for different strategies, does that include running models for what we're doing in terms of timing our street lights? Have
Absolutely.
we modeled that?
We certainly intend on traffic synchronization to be one of the scenarios we run through the tool. So the future application of the tool would be to develop emission control strategies or to evaluate potential control strategies that are already being considered, like traffic synchronization or the work being done on East Kellogg, the North Junction, etc. Rating each of these control strategies on their projected effectiveness, elasticity, visibility in the public, cost, etc., and then selecting the top 10 projects to run through the DST. We would then update these projects based on what we found after running them through the DST and come to council with 5 project recommendations that we felt had the greatest impact and present those to you all. We would also like to present this methodology to the EPA in support of a paradigm shift. So we would like to establish a new way to measure attainment using a more outcomes-based approach. We want to work with the EPA to develop this outcomes-based approach, and we think that our decision support tool is a great way to do so. So right now we're in the process of working to schedule a meeting with the Region 7 administrator. The air quality modeling consultant has offered to be present to provide the results of our modeling efforts, and then we would also like to present to them the outcomes-based application tool that we've created, the Air Quality Control Strategy Decision Support Tool. I would also just like to call attention to some legislation that's currently in the House and the Senate that includes language to limit the well, let me just skip to the good part. Limit sanctions and fees in some ozone and PM non-attainment areas if the state can demonstrate non-attainment would have been avoided or attainment achieved if not for emissions that are beyond the state's control. So this language is currently in HR 806 and S 452. We have included this in our federal legislative agenda, an emphasis on these 2 bills, and we're currently coordinating with our federal lobbyist. So the third component of this new Ozone Advanced program plan is the Be Air Aware campaign. So parallel to the air quality modeling effort, we wanted to sort of hit the ground running on this public outreach approach because we saw the numbers of the non-road and on-road sources being so high to our ozone formation. So We wanted to increase public awareness and support for ozone and emission-reducing behaviors in the Wichita MSA. We had communication objectives to educate residents about what ozone is and why it is harmful for our community, and then also create a call to action on what they can do to help reduce ozone-forming emissions in the area. The campaign targeted residents in the MSA ages 21 to 37. It's a 7-month campaign that began in March and ends in October, with peak messaging occurring in May and August during those more prevalent ozone months. The campaign consists of 2 rounds. The first round being the Don't Be a Buzzkill campaign. This campaign was intended to be an attention-grabbing message aimed at motivating community members to find out more on a new website that was created. The Spot Beatrice campaign is a social media campaign aimed at capturing followers and expanding our message base, both on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We are rolling out these campaigns through radio and television interviews, as well as on social media platforms. We have boosted posts and ads on Facebook. We have a new Facebook group. We also have Twitter and Instagram strategic posts. There are radio commercials, both 15 and 30-second ads on 10 stations currently running, as well as digital ads on Google. We've partnered with the Wichita Moms blog, who has over 15,000 followers in the Wichita MSA, and they've done a piece on air quality and what individuals in the region can do to improve air quality. And then we've worked with Transit to do king and queen ads on 10 buses for the duration of ozone season. And then my favorite piece, during the Spot Beatrice campaign, we will have a full bus wrap. We'll have Beatrice just buzzing around the city in the way of a school bus or a full bus wrap, so that's very exciting. And then we also created a very user-friendly website where individuals can log on, and there are actions available that they can select to incorporate into their everyday lives. Behavior changes that will make really big impacts to those sections of that pie chart that are within our control, within the public's control, and we're also tracking those in the way of a pledge system. So someone goes on, they select a few things that they can do, like I pledge to take my lunch to work, I pledge to ride my bike or walk, and they can select the ones that fit their lifestyle, and then they enter a little bit of information, their zip code, email address, and submit those to us, and we're able to track that community involvement on the back end and see how impactful this campaign is.
So no campaign to, say, hug a Prius owner?
No, we leave that to the polar bears. So this is just a snapshot of the campaign rollout and the campaign creative. This is some of the efforts that are currently ongoing right now, and then our Spot Beatrice campaign flight will roll out on August 2nd. This is our creative for Don't Be a Buzzkill, and you'll probably see this around town on buses and in ads on social media. So today we're just asking for support of this revised program strategy, as well as the support discussions with EPA to develop an outcomes-based compliance approach. Our future includes preparing scenarios for the decision support tool I described, as well as continuing the Be Aware campaign and continue the coordination with the EPA. This is just a brief look at the revised phases moving forward. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Do we have any questions? So I certainly would encourage us addressing the EPA for those issues that you addressed, and I would also encourage us to get our federal lobbyist involved in those discussions. Obviously, it makes sense that if we have zero control, we ought to be able to encourage policies to follow along those guidelines. So, any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. Mr. Manager. I'm Troy Livingston, Deputy Chief, Wichita Police Department. I'm here to give a review, which is a part of the ordinance, on the nuisance ordinance. It's due, actually, a report is due to council by July 31st, but this is kind of a preview of the information you'll be receiving in that report. As you well know, certain properties in the city of Wichita demand more police resources, and they get a disproportionate number of police resources and emergency services. So when Chief Ramsey got here, his intent was to get an ordinance that would provide the officers with a tool to address locations that had excessive calls for service. What I hope to do today is just give you a little bit of a reminder on what the ordinance is about and how it's structured, and then I'll go through a couple of examples of where the ordinance has been successful. And then over the past year, we've been evaluating this as often as possible, and we hope to just not make any official recommendations, just to show you some of the things that we're considering as we go forward with this ordinance. As you know, we enacted this in December of 2016. It has been proven to be a good tool for my officers in the field. It really holds property owners and managers accountable for what happens on their property. And really, we put a focus on collaborating with property owners and managers. We are not there to try to force a plan on them. Rather, we hope they come up with plans on their own, and we just advise them. So just as a reminder, a nuisance activity is defined as a trigger event in the ordinance, which is a police department incident, criminal conviction, or criminal diversion related to a series of defined criminal violations. And there are several. I can give you a few examples, like gambling, prostitution, possession of alcohol, or unlicensed sale of alcohol, possession of drugs. Those, if you have two of those, that could be a triggering event. Well, once you get to the third, I'll describe that here in a minute. It's sometimes it can be a little confusing. But for a single family property, if you have two or more trigger events, we will send a letter, and then we will warn you that if you have a third, that we will come out and help develop an abatement plan for that property. Now, for commercial and multi-family properties, it's 3 trigger events. I will point out that a search warrant or a shooting on either property, whether it's commercial, multifamily, or single-family residence, counts as true trigger events. So if you had a search warrant or a shooting, we would automatically send that letter and then meet with the property owners or managers. Upon a next trigger event, though, that's where we actually sit down and meet with the property owners or managers and develop a plan. And that plan is essentially designed to correct the issues or problems at that property. I'll tell you, the officers have been pretty creative over the last year, and property owners have been pretty receptive and have worked with us quite a bit. Just to tell you what the ordinance really requires is reporting to the City Council the number of properties that received initial notice, the number of properties that were required to submit an abatement plan, and the number of properties brought into compliance, and whether we collected any revenue for police services. So over this past year, or actually since 2016, so about a year and a half, WPD supervision, we have met with our community policing officers quite often over this time period just to get feedback. Also, we've interacted with council and the mayor over the last year and a half, and you've provided some feedback that you've heard from residents or just things that you observed, and we've taken those into consideration. And then finally, every week we have a comp stat meeting. It's really just a crime analysis meeting, and every week we look at the numbers of properties and nuisances and excessive calls for service. So we'll really evaluate this on a weekly basis. So this slide gives you, it's broken down by patrol north, south, east, and west, and I'll explain these numbers a little bit. Down below, we wrote some code in the records management system to make sure that we didn't miss anything. So these are the number, down below you'll see the total number of cases that have gone out and the total number of locations. So obviously you'll see some locations have more than one case. But those are sent out to the substations, and the beat coordinators drill down into those cases to see which ones really qualify for this ordinance. And you can see that they're fairly balanced up top. South is a little bit higher. But you'll notice that as you go down, the number of letters sent, meetings attended, and signed agreements become fewer and fewer. And that's really a sign of success for the ordinance. What that tells us is that people are actually meeting with the officers, developing a plan and resolving the issues on that property. So that's why you don't see a lot of meetings or a lot of plans. So I'll give you an example. We've had officers go out to scenes and they remind property owners without even a letter. The first time they're out there, they'll educate people, and through this education, people are actually resolving some of the issues on their own. And I will tell you that the property owners are actually very eager to resolve the issue because they don't want to have charges for police services brought to them. Before I move on, was there any questions about this slide? Because I figured the numbers would generate some questions.
Questions?
We can come back to it. I will tell you that since the ordinance was enacted, we have not had to charge anyone with violating the nuisance ordinance, so we have not recovered any fees. I know that was a concern when we first brought the ordinance to council. Property owners have been collaborating with our officers. I'll give you an example, and I didn't name the apartment complex, but we do have an apartment complex in southwest Wichita that had a number of triggering events. It's an apartment complex that has kind of a history of some criminal activity. And the community policing officer met with the manager there, and you'll see that calls decreased from 59 calls to just 6 in about a 3-month period. And what they did is they met and developed a plan, and it was the property manager's decision to hire off-duty officers to work part-time there. They also did a crime prevention through environmental design analysis of the property, so they improved some lighting and just assessed the property to make sure it was less attractive for criminal activity. They hold monthly meetings with the tenants. Also, there's been a recommendation that some property managers put like a crime-free addendum into their lease agreements. And so this has actually turned out to be a good tool for property owners and managers because they're able to evict tenants that violate the crime-free amendment or addendum. Another example, we had an East Side nightclub. They had a shooting, so that was a triggering event. We immediately sent a letter, and then they had a shots fired call, and so we met with them and started to develop a plan. And this property owner was very active and very supportive. She bought a surveillance camera system, put up signage for loitering and trespassing, improved their lighting, and actually educated some of their security or bouncers at that club. They have not been back on our excessive call list since this meeting. So a few things that have come up over the past year, the officers have made some recommendations, and we've heard from property owners and managers about some of the things that we could do to enhance this ordinance. This is just for consideration. This is nothing official, but we would like to discuss in the future adding aggravated persons crimes to the ordinance and making that as a triggering event. So a shooting is a triggering event, but a stabbing necessarily would not be. So this would give us the ability to send the letters and start that process of meeting with the property owners on other crimes other than just shootings and search warrants. Also, this past year we had an issue with a learning center in Patrol North. There was some criminal activity around there, and we were limited on what we could do to assist that school. So the idea came up that maybe we enhance this ordinance within 200 feet of a school property, and we would add the criminal weapons definition into the ordinance as well, because we cover things with shootings, but not necessarily clubbings or stabbings. So just to kind of recap some of those, we'll be looking and discussing adding the aggravated persons crime definition to the ordinance, enhancing the ordinance. If one of these triggering events occurs within 200 feet of a school property, any violation would be an automatic triggering event. So it would allow us to react quicker and assist these schools a little faster. We're also considering maybe a recommendation of changing the compliance period from 30 days to 90 days on multifamily housing and on commercial properties, quite simply because sometimes it takes a little bit longer to resolve some of their issues. However, what we were finding is that they would come into compliance about day 28 or 29, and then, well, they'd come into compliance and then they would hit their 31st or 32nd day, and then the clock would start all over. And so we weren't getting anywhere with some of the properties. So this compliance period for all properties begins upon the responsible party's receipt of the service. And so we've learned over the past year that, you know, maybe 30 days is not long enough for the compliance period. That was a quick, brief overview. I have here to answer any questions you might have, or input, or feedback.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, Troy, thanks for the presentation. That was very useful. Have the Broadway corridor officers been using this?
Well, the community policing officer assigned that area does.
In that area?
But they're working together, yes. So the Broadway corridor officers are helping with it, but really it's kind of administered by the beat coordinator or the community policing officer.
So has it been helpful in that area? I guess that's my question.
Yes,
Okay.
the feedback they tell me it is. And if you look at those numbers, you'll see the fact that we haven't had to have an actual plan in that bureau is indicative that we're successful with this ordinance.
Okay. Thank you.
Property owners are eager to correct their issues before they have to develop a plan.
So obviously the whole goal was to free up resources so that we aren't attending these same calls from properties where simply the property manager wasn't doing their part.
Yes.
So I think we've been successful looking at the data. I think we can continue to. I mean, you had some really good stories in there where we've reduced call loads from, what was it, 52 to 6 or something like that?
Yeah, 59 to 6, just over a 3-month period.
So 59 to 6 in a 3-month period. So hopefully, along with our plan to increase police staffing, this also helps give officers more time.
Yes, it's been a useful tool. I will tell you, I have a property that has a long history of criminal activity. And that's the one property you see where we've actually developed a plan. They're actually very receptive and they've been working with us, but because of the history of the criminal activity there, that property's been a little bit tougher. What's encouraging is the property owner has been very eager to sit down and work with us, where in the past they have not. And I think the ordinance is the tool that's
good
facilitating that.
Thank you. Councilmember Clendon.
Well, I think you just kind of answered part of my question. It seems like some of the property owners are a little overwhelmed and not knowing what to do, and the increased communication has really been key, along with some of the consequences for not communicating. But just appreciate all the work on this. This was something that were very, at least I was very anxious to see how effective it was going to be, and not having to assess anybody is really a great thing. That just means people are working with you and problems are being resolved. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I agree. We've had examples of landlords putting in the crime-free addendum to their lease agreements, and when they have these triggered events, we contact them and they're quick to evict their tenants who are not complying with the law. So it's been a useful tool for property owners and managers as well.
Sure.
Great. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Bluebond, did you have?
I just kind of wanted to echo the same remarks. I had probably more concerns about this than anyone since I own several investment properties, and I can say that I have not had any issues. I don't know of any investors that have had any negative issues, and I really haven't heard any negative issues about the public. So
that's good to hear.
Because I was very cautious about this. And
sure.
Yeah, pretty tickled the way it turned out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're encouraging you to continue and do more.
Okay.
One thing I would add before we finish today, and not so much the mission that you're on, but when we look at, as I mentioned, we're adding officers this next year. A big part of that addition of officers is going to be very proactive in terms of adding crime analysis. And so hopefully that will help you carry out your mission on top of what we're doing with our typical policing. But we're putting a significant amount of resources next year in crime analyst to the tune of, I believe, over $250,000, maybe more than that, when you add it all up for supervisors, four positions. And so we're trying to be more proactive. We'll hopefully be able to monitor that too and see how that all plays together.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's gonna give us the ability to really drill down on the micro level in neighborhoods. You know, officers need very specific information when it comes to, you know, come up with plans and fighting crime, and sometimes the 10,000-foot view is not as good as really drilling down, so the crime analyst will be very useful.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Robert, anything else? All right, we are finished for the day.